So, welcome to this episode. I'm here with a special guest, Everett Sussman. He's an estate attorney that I was fortunate enough to meet through some networks. So, I figured I'd bring him along here to share his wisdom. You know, one of the things that struck me when I first met Everett and read a little bit more about him was his ability to bring peace of mind to people. You know, when we think about the financial space and even life in general, like peace is a good thing. And, you know, there's a lot of things that, especially around your financial lives and even just general life and, you know, things with family, that it can get complicated. So anywhere we can bring peace of mind to it is, to me, a good thing. So Everett, welcome to the Perennial Pride sort of family and listeners, and really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, Tom. Happy to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, and you know, and this is a space, and certainly in the financial world, whether it's taxes or death, things that are inevitable, right? Was that quote from Ben Franklin? It's you know, only two things that are certain, and death is not a topic a lot of people love to chat about, but that is definitely a certain thing in our lives. So today we're going to talk a little bit more in depth around kind of how you help your clients, and you've been doing this for quite some time. So tell me a little bit about sort of how you got into this field.
Well, when I was in law school, back it sometimes feels like the early 1800s, I took all the required classes, as all law students do, and I was actually struck by the creativity involved in estate planning law. That you can actually work with an individual from start to finish and make a difference. And that really appealed to me. I've been a solo practitioner for a little over 30 years now.
So you've gained quite a bit over time. I'm sure experience, knowledge is all we do is and it changes, right? So obviously it's keeping
Yes.
you at least on your toes, right? And certainly being ahead of it for clients in all shapes and sizes. So, you know, one of the things I always stress, and we stress this a lot in this podcast, is trying to achieve and impact more, right? Whether it's, you know, obviously for our families in our lifetime, but for generations to come, if that matters to you. And you know, more and more people as I get older, that starts to matter a little bit more. So tell me, can you sure to share with the listeners here just a little bit about your approach to how you work with your clients?
Well, certainly. I like to say that I help people sleep at night. The things that wake people up at 2 a.m, oh no, what if this would happen? What do I do? What would my kids do? Increasingly, what would the parent I take care of do? Would my spouse be able to stay in the home? What happens to my business? Would that still be going? Would something happen to that? Would it be taken care of? These are the things that wake people up at 2 a.m. These are the questions I can answer and help. And as you mentioned earlier, bring a little peace.
Yeah, it's one of those tough, tricky things, right, Everett? It's not, you know, these are not fun topics. It's not like I'm talking to my kids and it's like the happy dinner topic, right? You probably wouldn't do it then, but you know, it's one of those things. I read this within the Stoic philosophy, a concept of like a pre-mortem, like figure out what bad things are going to happen and do something about it while you can, right? Because waiting the last moment it's liable to turn out way worse than you ever imagined. So these are things you have to talk about with your clients to kind of really bring to light maybe things that they never want to happen, but they sometimes have to face that it could.
Well, very true. Things do happen that we don't expect. This is why we have health insurance and seatbelts. But I like to bring up the topics to my clients, not as something really bad might happen, but rather as what do you want to have happen? What can we do to improve the odds that really does happen? So, for example, I want to make sure that my grandchildren are able to afford going to college, which is more and more expensive, it seems, every couple of days. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that my elderly mother is taken care of well for the rest of her life? Because there's 7 children in the family, but one is the one who's really taking care of the parents. That's pretty much true for most families. You want to make sure that that business that you created 50 years ago and put your passion and life into keeps going. So how do you make that happen? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And it's making people think deeper, I think. It's challenging, right? We live in this crazy world. We want everything like last week.
right.
Right. But to think longer term about things and really make some decisions around some of these sensitive topics, I know it can be challenging, and I face it too. So, but that's why you have someone like an Everett to help you think through it, right? And sort of imagine what it could be, and then do what you can in terms of controlling it, right? We can't control everything.
Exactly. Just like with finances, the earlier you start, the more options you have, and the less dangerous and the less scary it is. Then if you start investing when you're 20, it's easier than if you start investing when you're 65. Estate planning, if you start it when you're younger, there are many options, as opposed to giving me a call when something bad has already happened and say, now what do we do? It's like, well, our options are limited. So.
Yeah, I like that philosophy. Yeah, I share that with my clients all the time from a financial end. Like there's only so much you can predict that will happen. You can hear all the pundits and experts say these things, but no one really knows.
Exactly.
And so for our sake, for our clients, like giving them as many options as possible so they can win as much as possible regardless of what happens. So that's really a tremendous point that you made. So let me kind of shift gears a little bit now to kind of some of the basics around estate planning, because just like anything else, I think it's one of those areas that certainly in the financial world and that people have maybe limited knowledge on. So, for instance, everyone's heard of wills, but and some people have heard of trusts, but they may have a misunderstanding of what they are and who they're for and what they can do. Can you kind of share, like, say, even just basics, like what's a difference between a will and a trust?
That's a great question. And just as a disclaimer, of course, anything I say is general information and not creating an attorney-client privilege. But in its simplest form, the difference between a will and a trust is the difference between a photograph and a movie. A will is take a picture of a person's situation the instant they pass away. What happens? That's what's in the will. A trust is the movie. Over a period of time, as children get older, as grandchildren are born, as businesses evolve and hand down from generation to generation, what sorts of things will keep happening or changing? So trusts can be extraordinarily flexible and do many different things. There's so many different types of trusts that it's really hard to define them in a very small way, other than just, if it's going to last a long time, get a trust.
Good stuff. Yeah, and that's what it is. The complexity. Before we started recording, we talked about niches, and I'm sure in the estate planning world, like the variety of trusts, and to your point, for the right purpose, is can be pretty vast, for what I could tell.
Oh, absolutely. If you ever have heard of things like the Ford Foundation or the Carnegie Foundation, those were actually trusts. They were created by the family many, many years ago. They raised lots of money. That's one kind of trust. Unfortunately, it's not the kind of trust that most people are able to create, but there's types of trusts to protect against taxes. There are trusts to protect against individuals who are beneficiaries. You love them, but they're lousy with money. There are people families with special needs issues, and you need to put in special types of protections in a trust. Those are the types of things you don't want to do with a will. So, and that's just a couple right off the top of my head.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why it's so important. Obviously, to your point, this is not meant to be legal advice. This is just to provide some education to get you thinking about it. And when we think about it, most people would say, "Hey, if they're say you're certainly starting off in their lives and maybe haven't amassed much money, and they don't need any fancy trusts or anything." This is often what I hear from people. So, like, one thing I also hear is that getting like a living trust will maybe help me get around probate. So is that true? And what's your expert opinion on that?
It's a very good question. There's basically living trusts are unfortunately thought of as the flat screen TV of estate planning. Everybody needs one. Problem is they don't. It's not a flat screen. And living trust is one tool in the estate planner's toolbox. If that is something you need, great. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's wildly overused. And the two reasons that most people, most lawyers who don't do a lot of estate planning say, oh yeah, you got to have the living trust, is it avoids taxes and it avoids probate. And not really. You're probably still going to have to do probate either way. Living trust does not give the kinds of protections that many people think it does. And probate isn't the enemy. And that puts me a bit in the minority viewpoint. Probate is not bad. Probate can be a good thing. It can be abused. There can be mistakes made, but that's true anywhere. There are times when, and again, it depends very much on the family situation, probate can be your best friend, depending on what's going on. It can shorten statutes of limitations to keep people from suing the estate. It can actually reduce taxes for things like real estate, stocks, and other investments. If somebody's owned them a long time, they're worth a lot more than they were. Going through probate can eliminate capital gains taxes. So the big taxes that used to be, many years ago, it used to be anybody who had probate over $600,000 was going to be hit with federal taxes. That number is now well up into the millions, to such an extent that very few people, less than 2% in the country, have to worry about it. So there's no need to protect yourself against something that's not going to affect you.
It's interesting. Yeah, I've always been under the impression that having your assets sort of maybe owned, or I know not all assets can be, through a living trust would speed up the sort of transfer of wealth. But it sounds like maybe that's not in all cases that way.
Not in all cases. In some cases, yes, there are certain types of assets and some types of living trusts make a lot of sense. I'm definitely not saying they're a bad thing in general. I'm saying they're overused and they're misused. And just like a medication at the pharmacy, it might be just the right thing for a certain person, but it's not for everybody. And if the wrong person takes that medication, it'll do more harm than good.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I know you're licensed in New York and Connecticut, correct?
Correct.
Right. And so there are going to be some variations because as you go around the country. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. Estate planning and probate law is very different state by state. Most of the states are based on English common law. I like to say estate planning is a combination of 13th century law and 22nd century law, things we still haven't figured out. But a few areas, such as Louisiana, Alaska, Hawaii, to an extent Florida, their laws are based in different histories. And it's a very different scenario.
That's interesting. Yeah. So, and just so how does it work when folks maybe, and we're starting to see more people who are in our area, we're in Connecticut area, moving to Florida? How does that change anything?
Changes quite a bit, not to mention that they don't need the snow thrower anymore.
Or sweaters.
Yes. Florida has many individual laws that are very different. Just talking from an estate and probate standpoint, one of the biggest that I'm aware of is what's known as the Homestead Act, which means if a person owns their own home, their residence in Florida, they can't give it away through a trust or will. It has to go to their surviving spouse. No other document will override that. Whereas in Connecticut, for example, if I wanted to leave my house not to my wife, but to my child, I'm legally allowed to do that with some limitations. My wife would have to be protected and taken care of in other ways, but not necessarily the house. Sometimes that works. So it's one of the many reasons why if a person moves or has a home in multiple states, the snowbirds who summer in one place, winter in another, they should be talking to an attorney in both locations to make sure that what they want to have happen does, and that the laws of one state don't trip up another one.
Yeah, that definitely adds some complexity, and that's why it's so key to be working with someone like Everett and to get these things reviewed, because as I do know, life will change and some of it will be dictated by choices like that. So it's always good to get a review to see what kind of impact it would have, or if you need additional counsel elsewhere, right, to work with you on it.
Absolutely. I often bring in other professionals because when a client talks to me, they have their own concerns. They don't care so much whether their concerns are addressed by the lawyer, the CPA, the investment advisor, the whatever it is, as long as, to bring back something I said earlier, they can sleep at night. So I want to work with financial advisors, accountants, insurance, so that everything dovetails, that we don't have, oh yes, I leave 1/3 of my estate to each of my children. That's in the will. That's fine. But they never remembered to change the $1 million life insurance policy that only goes to the first child. That life insurance is going to go outside the will. The will won't affect it. And what the individual who created it, what they want, isn't going to happen that way. So you need to work as a team.
No, that is absolutely key. And I know Everett and I, we've talked about that too, and how important that is, because there's potentially a lot of moving parts, and to keep them coordinated and aligned, and a lot of folks are kind of caught in the middle and with a whole bunch of different advisors trying to manage it. And one little thing like that, it seems so small, but can have a huge impact what you want to happen.
I have that happen far too often as we get things going. I have something going on right now where the life insurance policy named the spouse, but was never changed when the spouse became an ex-spouse. And obviously, the individual didn't want to leave the money to that person anymore, but never connected the professionals, and had updated her will, but never had the lawyer think to talk to the insurance individual. It's very easy to make that change, but you actually have to do it.
Yes. Yes. Minor detail. Well, not so minor.
Not so minor, and it's a better.
So speaking on that, so obviously there's a variety of trusts and sort of planning these along the way. And one of the couple of things, I know you deal with some more complicated, complex things. And a couple of them I would like to maybe just talk a little bit more detail about, just to kind of give our audience here a flavor. So one thing you mentioned, taxes, and I've yet to come across too many people that enjoy paying taxes. So for people who are looking to pass as much as they can off to their heirs or charities or whatever, I know there's one area in terms of life insurance, like ILITs, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that for a moment?
Absolutely. ILITs are one of the more complicated areas. Irrevocable life insurance trust. Basically, what happens is you create a trust, and then the lawyer who creates it talks to the individual's insurance provider, buys life insurance. The life insurance then goes into the trust. Now, when that individual passes away, the trust is now the beneficiary of whatever the money was for that life insurance policy. The money pours into the trust. The trust is now already set up with all the rules and regulations of what a trust should do. And that money can now be used for protecting the surviving spouse, children, grandchildren, charities. If you want to provide for your church, your alma mater, what have you, that can all be done. And again, this isn't something you want to do with a will. This is something that you need it's a more complicated type of a trust.
And who would typically, what have you seen where this is a better fit for them, given what they're trying to do? Like, what are situations that you can paint for the audience here?
Off the top of my head, the easiest people to look to for ILITs are people who are a little older. They know that their beneficiaries are going to be around for a while. Maybe they're looking toward their grandchildren or great-grandchildren. People who have special needs children or grandchildren and know that those individuals will not be able to support themselves. So having a trustee can help protect them. People who, for whatever reason, know that, they love their son, but the son is just lousy with money. And if they got $1 million in cash, their GPS would be reading how to get to Ledyard from here. There's just no question in his mind. He wants to protect that person and make sure that they have a good life and that the money isn't wasted. So those are a few right off the top of my head that can do that.
Wonderful. And this also plays into, which I know laws will change and will never stay exactly the same. We don't know. But as folks who are building wealth and becoming even more successful in that side of things, they may actually run into things like inheritance taxes, estate taxes, all that stuff. And that's going to be unique by state, right? Or at least it's inheritance tax.
Taxes, when a person passes away, you mentioned nothing is certain save death and taxes. I like to say that when a person passes away, 14 different types of taxes are triggered. Nobody pays all 14. Good planning avoids all the big ones. For example, generation skipping transfer taxes can be huge, but very few people actually pay them. So if you can, for example, pay the 1/3 of 1% probate fee, okay, that's technically a tax, but it's not a very big one. So that one you don't worry about so much. Connecticut's probate fee used to be 14%. Wow. So back then it made a lot more sense to try to avoid it. Now, not nearly so much. Federal estate taxes, capital gains, income in respect of the decedents. There's all sorts of different types of taxes. Good planning can help protect against most of them. So, but yes, different states absolutely have different taxes, different tax types, and different tax rates. It's said that every state, every government needs to get paid for somehow. So a state that, for example, has no sales tax will probably have a higher income tax or luxury tax or estate tax. They'll get you one way or another. Nobody gets out free. But yes, different states, different places, have different rules. And yes, the rules definitely keep changing. If you've done something, prepped your estate plan 5 years ago, it's time to go back and take a look and make sure it still does what you want. And maybe there's a better way of doing it. Just like with financial planning, your plan might have made perfect sense at the time, but there might be better options available now that just didn't exist back then.
Right. That's a great example, and it's never a set it and forget it sort of situation. It just doesn't work that way. Yeah, no, that's great. And you touched on a little bit too. So obviously there's a tax angle that, to mitigate some of those costs, but you touched on a little bit too, which I want to learn more about too, is, how these trusts or estate plans can be designed in a way to take care of children or others with special needs. So can you talk to me a little bit more about sort of, what you help families to do in that world? Because it's an area I know is a specific expertise that you have.
Well, I can't call it a specialization because the law doesn't recognize that term, but I do have a lot of experience in it. And special needs is it's a much more complex area of estate planning. As they say, it's not for the timid. Basically, what you're doing is you're setting up trusts for that special needs individual or on behalf of them, depending on the individual situation, and every family is different, of course. One common way of doing it is you set up a trust, you name someone other than yourself and other than that special needs individual as a trustee. Somehow assets for that individual get into the trust, either during somebody's lifetime, as a pouring over from a will, from life insurance. Somehow the assets go in and that trustee watches over them. Now, if the lawyer created it properly, not only can those assets be used for the benefit of the special needs individual, but it can also help that individual qualify for things such as state assistance, Medicaid, whatever else. Whereas an individual who is on state assistance and gets an inheritance, that inheritance most likely is going back to the state to pay off what the state has already provided. So it doesn't help the individual. Only by setting up this sort of a trust can the person's lifestyle be improved and not be disqualified from various assistance.
Interesting. Yeah, because that's why having someone with your, again, you can't say it's not a designation, but your experience will tell you how this fits into your broader sort of financial life. And so how some of these things that taken in isolation could actually harm you in other ways if you haven't thought about it.
Exactly. It can harm you and it can harm other people that you weren't intending to. Let's say, for example, you have 3 children, one of whom is severe ASD, and you, like many parents, say, well, I love all my kids. I'm going to leave my estate equally shared among the 3 of them. Well, what's going to happen is 1/3 of that money is going to disappear to the state, that 1/3 that was going to go to the special needs individual. That can be thought of as hurting the other 2, because the money could have been used for their benefit or set up to assist the special needs individual by setting up a better trust. So everything we do has a ripple effect.
Yeah, that's why it needs to be looked at it, in totality. So the best solution gets put in place and you have, options down the road, right? To better support what you want. So, the last thing I want to cover in this conversation is there anything you would say is really for business owners specifically? We have a range of different audience members here on this podcast. Like anything in particular for business owners they need to be thinking about differently versus someone who's not a business owner as it relates to their estate plan?
And that's a very good question. I find my work with business owners, particularly people who've created their own business, the family business, that sort of thing. Let me give you an example of situation. 3 brothers create a company. They've all put some of their money into it. They all work at it full time. The business is going very well. If one of those brothers dies, what happens to the business? does that one brother who has a third of the company, does his wife now own a third of the company? Does she now have the right to come in and start telling people who's hired and who's fired? What's the day-to-day? What happens to the clients or customers that one brother was bringing in? If he was the one who did the rainmaking, how do you manage that? What if the three decide that they want to sell? How is that worked out? Going down, for the employees. And what if they're doing so well, one of them wants to retire, but they don't want to simply walk away from the company that they've put so much in? How do they know that they're going to have a fair share of retirement funds coming from this business that they helped to build? None of these things should be discussed at the moment that somebody has passed away or has decided to retire. This should all be done in advance, and various levels of trusts can be created to do that. I've worked with everything from church congregations to landscaping companies to various types of build-up organizations to make sure that continuity is there and that the important people are protected.
Yeah, and it's so key to be able to highlight what could happen and open up at least a dialogue around what they would want to have occur. And it's with business owners being so crazy busy, and even non-business owners are crazy with life and just trying to sort of juggle everything. Like it's really nice to hear as you help them think through it, right? So they can figure out for themselves what is best. And then then you help them execute it, right?
Exactly.
And put things in place.
Nobody is good at everything. We all have our areas, our strengths. A business owner is probably very good at doing the business that they've been doing, but they need help with the legal side or financial investing to protect the assets or insurance or whatever else it is that surrounds the business day to day itself. They need to do that. And just as I tell my clients who say, well, why can't I just go online, do it myself? Get the chat bot, get AI, DIY it. I tell people, look, when your eyesight started going, you didn't build your own eyeglasses. You went out and had somebody do it. When your body was hurting, you had somebody else take out your appendix. You didn't do it yourself. There's certain things you want to get an experienced individual to help you with because you can't be good at everything. And if you make a mistake trying it, you could be in a lot of trouble. And anybody who does DIY work in their own home, they know there's a line. Sure, they'll change a light bulb. Maybe they'll put in a ceiling fan. They'll change a sink. But when you say, how about replacing the circuit board? Most people will say, no. I'm going to get a pro in for that. I'm not going to do the piping underground. For that, you need the specialists. You need the experts, because if I make a mistake, the damage is going to be huge.
Yes. And I always ask the question, when would be the worst time to find out that your plan wasn't what you expected it to be? And obviously it's at the time you need it.
Exactly.
Right. That's the worst time. So this is why you bring in experts who can help you think through it and put things in place that are going to be right for your situation and the goal. So, Everett, this was a great conversation. I, covered a whole bunch of different areas, but I think gave a really good sort of broad strokes on some of the key things people need to be thinking about around their estate plan, because it's just too important, regardless if you're a business owner or work for an employer, right? Most people do things for their family. This is one gift that you can give your family, is a rock solid estate plan to ensure that if anything happens to you or your spouse or others, that your family's taken care of. I would highly encourage you to reach out to an expert like Everett. And Everett, how would people best get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Easiest way to get in touch with me is my website is estatelawonline.com, or just a straight email, everett@egsussman.com.
Wonderful. We'll definitely put that in the show notes so people can go check you out and inquire about you and your services. So Everett, I appreciate you sharing your extensive experience and expertise here. I know this was the tip, and we'll probably have you come back on and share some more fun sort of tidbits and knowledge around this space, because it is pretty wide and vast. So, but I really appreciate you spending some time with me, and I know our listeners got some tremendous value, so I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'd be happy to be here. I'll be happy to come back.
Awesome. Great. Well, have a great day, and we'll check in with you soon.
Take
care.
Thanks for joining me on this episode today. I really am grateful for you as listeners to the Perennial Pride podcast. I hope you're getting some tremendous value out of it, and hopefully pushing you along your journey to financial freedom. I put this podcast together really to help you get more educated around your finances so that you feel empowered to live the life that you really want. And if you like the content that you heard today or watched, then I would encourage you to go to my website, perennialpride.com. There's tons of other content there. And you can access my book, Wealth Beyond the Numbers. You can buy it there on my website. It's a aggregation of a lot of great tips and tools I've learned to not only build my wealth in my accounts, but build wealth in my life and abundance and joy, and something that has a lot of my experiences in the journey that I've been on personally. Hopefully that can be also of value to you as you sort of move forward. So thanks again for being a Perennial Pride listener, and we'll see you on the next episode.